everybody? It's your boy, Captain Hunter, coming at you again. Thank you so much for tuning in to this particular show, to this particular episode, and of course, to this podcast. It's not Captain Hunter's podcast. It's LMH Consulting Services Podcast, where I'm talking about police issues, bridging the divide between the police and the communities that they serve, and all that, right? Trying to make not only the police better, but the communities better, trying to ensure that we understand, what the police are doing, where they're coming from, where these decisions are made, why these decisions are made, the bureaucracy, the understanding, the leadership, the management, and the laws that go into driving forces, all that. We're trying to make it plain and clear to the public, and trying to get this information out there, right? So we don't have to always have our ire aimed at the police. Before we get into it, make sure that you hit that rate, subscribe, and share button. Hit that rate, subscribe, and share button, right? Let's make it do what it's due, and make sure this podcast is growing and growing. Now that I finished up a few things, I really am going to try to get back into making sure that I am active in this space. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at this new executive law enforcement accountability database, this executive order by the Biden administration. So the Biden administration has conducted or put forth an executive order 1404, which advances the effective accountability policing and criminal justice practices to enhance public trust and public safety. But is it really going to help and enhance public safety and most importantly, public trust? Because if you don't have the public trust, if the public does not trust you, doesn't believe in the police legitimacy in procedural justice, these types of new buzzwords within law enforcement, newer words in law enforcement, then they're not going to cooperate with you. They're not going to cooperate with investigations. They're not going to turn over video. They're going to protest you at every turn. They're not going to want to speak to you. Speak to you as a police officer, et cetera, et cetera. So we're trying to make sure that we try to get better, right? So how do we build this trust, right? So the President of the United States, in response to the George Floyd incident, which was 2020, why does it take government so long to do these types of things? We know that Congress couldn't get any type of national consensus passed. So states had to act individually, which they should have and did, to pass different George Floyd accountability bills, no choke bills, strengthening their language concerning the use of force, all this type of thing, which is going to be talked about in this, right? So there's 50 states, over 18,000 police departments, sheriff department. And by police departments, I mean sheriff's departments, local police departments, state police departments, all these different agencies, right? And these are not federals, right? These are what we would call local police departments, consisting of state sheriff's departments, local agencies. And these can range from one or two officers all the way up to the larger NYPDs, LAPDs, with thousands, 30,000 something police officers, right? Those are just sworn officers, not including the other thousands of members of their administrative staff, etc. So the President of the United States declared a policy, and so we're going to just take a look at what this can do and what this should do, right? So it's about public reporting to promote transparency as required by the executive order. The DOJ, Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Statistics, will publish an annual public report with aggregated and anonymized information on an National Law Enforcement, what does that stand for? National Law Enforcement Accountability Database, right? So that's what it stands for, right? So this is what it's going to do, right? They're going to go over, right? And what the purpose of this is to infuse into the public, or allow the public to one day access specific items related to any type of charges against charges of employee misconduct, right? As specified in the National Executive Order, the NLEAD, includes law enforcement officers who have records that include one of the following categories related to officer misconduct: criminal convictions, suspensions of law enforcement officers' enforcement authorities, such as decertification, terminations, right, firings, civil judgments, including amounts if publicly available related to official duties, right, resignations or retirements while under investigation for serious misconduct, sustained complaints or records of disciplinary action based on the findings of serious misconduct. So serious misconduct, as will be defined, is not going to be, they were maybe yelling at a suspect, or yelling at a complainant, or running a red light or something like that, right? The executive order defines serious misconduct as excessive force, bias, discrimination, obstruction of justice, false reports, false statements under oath, theft, or sexual misconduct. Right, so then it goes into how it was built and developed and all that. Right, so the DOJ has partnered with the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, which runs the National Decertification Index. The National Decertification Index is the National Registry of Law Enforcement decertification and revocation actions related to officer misconduct that is currently used by all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Why we still have 50 states, I don't know. This month, with the DOJ's assistance, IDList released a new request for proposal to update and expand the NDAI to include additional categories of information required by the executive order. Right. So they want to expand that, but this is really so far, and this is a start, and this is a start in the right direction. So it's mostly for federal law enforcement agencies, FBI, etc. Now, according to the APA, which we're going to go to here, let's see, the Justice Department creates a database to track records of misconduct by federal law enforcement. Right. So this is the key word here. Right. So far, it's federal. Right. So there's a difference between Border Patrol, FBI, DEA, ATF. Between local law enforcement, as I would defined it before, state police, sheriff's departments, and city police officers. The federal move is a step toward accountability among growing calls for loopholes that allow our law enforcement officers to be rehired by other agencies after losing their job or resigning after misconduct allegations. The creation of the database was part of Joe Biden's May 2022 executive order. Right, it's 2023, almost 2024 as I record this. On policing, which included dozens of measures aimed at increasing accountability for federal law enforcement officers, right? So again, the president and his capacity can only address federal law enforcement. He or they, whoever the president is, cannot address state, local police officers, right? So this is going to miss them. This database will ensure the records of serious misconduct by federal law enforcement officers are readily available to those agencies, right? Right, but the database will only contain records of federal law enforcement officers and not be open to the public. Falls short of national misconduct database call for some police officer reform advocates. I agree that it needs to be expanded to all law enforcement and open to the public. Quite honestly, although the whole open to the public thing, man, I really have been thinking about that. As far as, is it really needed to necessary? Just for people to just be able to go to a registry and just type in and see, officer's misconduct. I'm not saying that if you had put in a complaint or people want to be hired, or, if you want to make a complaint against an officer, should you be able to then access their records or be part of the investigation process, which you should get, you as a civilian should get some type of copy of. I'm not saying that. So I think that would probably be good. But just willy-nilly, just Googling officers' names or going to this registry to see if they're listed, I don't know how I feel about that. Although, again, and this is my waffling about that, because, again, it is for national, excuse me, it is for serious offenses, right? This, bias, discrimination, sexual misconduct, terminations, etc. So Attorney Merrick Garland said it would give federal agencies an important new tool for vetting and hiring officers and agents that would help strengthen our efforts to build and maintain the public's trust. So again, I think that this is all just leading up to eventually setting the path for inclusion of local law enforcement. I'm sure that the federal agencies do a fantastic job with their recruitment background and all that. And I'm sure that most local agencies do a good job with their background checks and asking, have you ever been fired? And if so, but it's the few agencies that don't. Had a conversation with a guy who was suing his state, his local police department in California. And as part of his lawsuit, right, so he found out he used a term, I want to say it's something like piracy or I don't know. Whatever the term was, it means that the officers just quit one department because they're under allegations of misconduct, and then they just could get hired by another misconduct, right? I did a story, I'm pretty sure if my memory serves me correctly, that if you remember the case of Sandra Bland, right? So the case with Sandra Bland, when she deceased herself, in that particular case, the officers who were supposed to be doing their routine checks to make sure that that type of activity didn't occur, didn't do what they were supposed to do. And they had falsified records saying that they had actually checked on inmates, and camera footage shows that they didn't. So those officers, or one or two of them, actually quit, and they were hired by another sheriff's county. This is the type of stuff that the public needs to know, and that agencies need to know, and they should be deliberate in not hiring those types of persons. If they do knowingly violate this type of conduct, they should be on the hook for any type of liabilities because they willfully neglected the information that's out there. So this is all the type of thing that needs to be looked into, right? Federal agencies will be responsible for reporting and updating records for officers who have faced criminal convictions, civil judgments, terminations, suspensions, resigning or retiring while under investigation, and sustaining complaints or disciplinary actions for serious misconduct, right? And then we get into all the serious misconducts, right? Discrimination, false report, making a false statement under oath, theft, and sexual misconduct. The database is currently only accessible by DOJ employees and will eventually be expanded to allow access by users in other federal law enforcement agencies as well as state and local law enforcement agencies. I'm fine with that, and I do think that if you do a complaint by a local, eventually we'll get into this in a second here. When and if it expands to local law enforcement, I do think that those individuals ought to be able to be included in it, and part of the background or the part of the internal affairs investigation, I would suggest, state somewhere in there saying that we have accessed this national database and, based on the other allegations, et cetera, something along those lines. Some type of verbiage in there needs to be said that this has been addressed. The Bureau of Justice Statistics will produce an annual report. Public leaders of Change of Color, National Racial Justice Organization, and knowledge creation of the federal database is encouraging, but said it only one of the many steps needed for broader police reform. For this initiative, this is the National Organization of Leaders at Colors of Change. Their statement is this initiative to reach communities that feel that the most impact of police violence. This database needs to include local and state police departments. Kyle Bibby, Chief of Campaigns and Programs, said in a statement, as we call for local and state jurisdictions to adopt this federal framework, as most consistent opposition force will continue to be local police unions, right? So it's going to be the police unions who don't want this type of stuff out there. The International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training has created a national repository for officer decertification that boasts more than 53,000 records from 49 state agencies. However, providing the records and using the records is voluntary, and the database does not include any other disciplinary measures such as firings or suspensions. Wow, that kind of defeats the whole purpose, right? If you're not including firings and suspensions. So this is what's going on here. I am in favor of this. What does this say? Miles Coggrove, a former Louisville Metro Police Department officer who was fired in January 2021 for violating use of force procedures and failing to use a body camera during a fatal raid in Breonna Taylor's apartment, was hired earlier this year by Carroll County Sheriff's Department in Kentucky. 2022, Timothy Lohman, the former Cleveland police officer who was fired for the fatal 2014. That's one I was thinking about, right? I was just kind of thinking about this case. Fatal 2014 shooting of 12-year-old Tamir Rice was hired by a small town of Pennsylvania to be its police officer. He resigned from the job amid public outrage. And there was another case too. I think it was in Cincinnati, Ohio, where this individual, somebody was running. I think they crashed the car and they got out and were running down the street. and the police were shooting him in the back, and I think he resigned and then got rehired by someone else, and never was brought up in any criminal charges to my recollection. So all this type of stuff, right, is what is needed. So that's my opinion. I'm not sure if I'm in a total agreement that it should be open, that the database should be open to the public for just regular consumption, just willy-nilly. I do think it should be part of background investigation protocols, and I also think that if they're under any type of internal affairs protocols, that it should be some type of verbiage should be in there saying that you looked up this officer, and it's never been a part of this justice database. Of course, there ought to be mandatory, cities got to make this mandatory that we're going to participate in this. As I was doing some research for this study, right, so let me just go here, right? The Washington Post, as fatal police shootings increase, more go unreported. Now, flawed FBI data has left thousands of deaths unaccounted and complicates efforts to hold troubled police departments accountable. So what this article goes on from the Washington Post. So anyway, as we go through, if you read this particular article, right, it goes on to report that that what is being reported to the FBI is not accurate because the Washington Post has started their own database. And you can read through much of this. Let me see if I can find one little statement here. This is a brother I had on my podcast before. Right. So let's go on. Let's read about Boston here. Boston was among the larger departments with missing data. The Post documented 11 fatal shootings by its officers since 2015, but none of those are recorded in the FBI's records. The Chicago Police Department reported 6 officer-involved shootings, but the Post logged 45. Police in Boise, Idaho fatally shot 12 people whose deaths were not recorded in the FBI database. This shows that the data from the FBI database has largely failed, said Rayshawnray, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute and a University of Maryland professor who has testified at state and federal levels about police reform. That said, some departments have received federal dollars while the shootings are unreported, he said. He speaks to how flawed the system currently is, not just the organizational structure of policing, but also the way the government funding operates. So what this is saying is what Rayshawnray, and I've had him on my podcast before, so make sure you go look up the archives on Captain Hunter's podcast on the audio version. I'm going to make sure I put this on the audio version as well, is that this is a systemic problem that police departments are not required to participate in this in including certain numbers into the crime rates and police shootings. And I'm tying these two in together, so just bear with me here. So if they're not required to report all of their FBI shootings, all of their fatal shootings to the FBI, and they're still, as the article would continue to go on and tell us about, is that they're still receiving some portion of federal dollars, right? So that's the problem. That's what Rayshawnray is talking about, right? This is a problem. They're not reporting all their information. It's incomplete, incorrect, and they're still receiving tax dollars. So this is a problem that police administrations need to fix in the reporting, and it's also something that the government needs to fix, and they need to know where their money is going, who's receiving it, et cetera, right? Some more. Let's see. Let's read some more of this. The FBI asks the roughly 18,000 law enforcement departments nationwide to report all homicides, including those by officers on duty, so that the information can be used for research and made available to the public. But compliance is mandatory only for federal law enforcement, right? So we're running into this. We don't want to run into the same problem we're having with this national reporting database of officer misconduct. The Post found that only 290 local law enforcement reported all fatal shootings to the FBI since 2015. Of the 18,000 law enforcement departments, what I'm calling local, only 290 reported all fatal police department shootings. That's what the Washington Post and their database has concluded. The decline in reporting is driven by multiple factors. In many cases, departments will simply choose not to report fatal police shootings to the FBI. In others, departments are required by law to send data to state officials who neglect to forward it to the FBI. So some cases, they being departments, administrations, are just doing what they're required to do by law, and that's submitted to the state. The state is then not telling the FBI. States. About a dozen departments told the Post that they had failed to report shooting because of clerical errors and would improve the process. In New Mexico, Farmington Police Chief Steve Hebe said he incorrectly assumed that other departments that are called to investigate his officer's shooting will report the homicides. Farmington Police fatally shot 4 people over 7 years. Not one of those is listed in the FBI's public database. And this goes on and on. I'm not going to continue to read all that. So the reason I wanted to include this particular article is we don't want to run into the same problem. And if I think that it ought to be mandatory that if you're going to receive any type of federal assistance, and I would even expand this, and this is what Tim Scott ran into, Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina ran into when he was trying to get his reform bills passed, is that when and if individuals, when and if, let me see how I want to verb this or articulate this. What Tim Scott ran into was, and what I would here's what I would advocate for is that when any type of federal aid, particularly if you have a troubled department, right? Let me just say this: any type of federal aid that you run into or that you are receiving ought to come with a host of different caveats, not just police federal aid, but just school funding, right? Fix your roads, right? Bridge updates, etc. All that ought to be tied up into, okay, we want to know how many what your graduation rates are for your schools, what kind of suspension levels you have, what are your, all this type of stuff, as well as, what your police department numbers are, fatal shootings, use of force reports, etc. All this ought to be tied up together. Because this, I think that all this helps. Now, I know that the school stuff is going to be difficult. I've talked to individuals about the school stuff. I am not an educator, but I am concerned. I am definitely concerned about over suspending individuals, or sometimes lack of suspending individuals, because there seems to be no consequence for students who fail to be punished adequately. So anyway, so that's a story for another time. But my point is, we don't want to run into the same problems with this new database about people not reporting and clerical errors. And we reported to the state. We thought they were going to do it. We thought this other municipality was going to do it. We thought this, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and all this kind of crazy nonsense. So it is a step in the right direction. Let me just finish off with that. It is a step in the right direction. We do need. And I think it was in this article, maybe another article. Yeah, I think it's part of it, where they are going to encourage. There's going to be some encouragement to ensure that all local law enforcement participate. Yes, here it is. Access to NLEAD to protect the safety and public and due process rights of police officers, right, may be identified. The NLEAD cannot be searched by the public. I'm leaning towards, I think that's the right decision. Access to NLEAD is initially limited to authorized Justice Department users, who will be expanded to allow access by authorized users from the federal law enforcement agencies for use of hiring, job assignment, promotion of law enforcement officers. I do think that it ought to go to all law enforcement personnel, particularly if they, some federal agent maybe he did 20 years and wants to become a police officer or something like that. I think that all that information ought to be available to all local law enforcement. In the future, NLEAD aims to offer data access to state and local agencies to support hiring and workforce practices. I think that either the state and local need to do their own thing, or they either need to do their own thing, or they need to join in with this particular database. I would be in favor of it all being aggregated and collected into one place where we call all be accessed. You type in someone, and we're not talking about millions. Hopefully, we're not talking about millions of people. We're talking about a few hundred of bad actors who are who shouldn't be police officers, shouldn't be federal officers in the first place, who are embarrassing law enforcement. We need to put them in a place where we can get those individuals out of there. So let me know your thoughts, your opinions. Is this a good idea? You are totally against the prospect of this agency, of this database, or do you think it's unnecessary? Do you think that police unions should fight against it? Do you think they will fight against it? Do you think it'd be successful? Is this something that's needed? What are your thoughts and your opinions? Right. Let me know your thoughts and your opinions. Till next time, much love and peace.